Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Jack Daly, Director of the Smithsonian's National Air and Space Museum, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to a special presentation by the crew of STS-135. The crew flew NASA's final space shuttle mission on Atlantis and will be sharing insights about their history-making flight. Today's program is a collaborative one presented by the museum in cooperation with the National Aeronautics and Space Administration. The gallery we are gathered in, Moving Beyond Earth, highlights the era of the Space Shuttle and the International Space Station. This museum is renowned for its collection of historic spacecraft, related artifacts, and a reputation we would not enjoy without the support of NASA. For decades, our close relationship with the agency has allowed us to acquire, preserve, and present space vehicles, equipment, spacesuits, and other artifacts. There are several space-related galleries in this building, tracing the history of human spaceflight back to the Mercury program. And at the Udvar-Hazy Center, an entire wing of the building, the James S. McDonald Space Hangar, houses space icons. The Smithsonian partnership with NASA will achieve another milestone with the arrival of the Space Shuttle Discovery next year. Let me take this opportunity to publicly thank NASA for selecting the National Air and Space Museum as the new home for this treasure. Discovery will be on view at the Stephen F. Udvar-Hazy Center, and when it arrives, we will invite the public to participate in the welcoming ceremonies. People often ask us what spaceflight is really like, and today we will find out. When Atlantis arrived after its mission, its commander stated how happy he was that the orbiter's next mission will be in the museum for generations to admire and appreciate. He's a proponent of museum-based education and has discussed how museums inspire youngsters to pursue aerospace careers. A highly experienced naval aviator, fighter pilot, and space traveler with 3 shuttle missions, 2 of which he commanded, and 40 days in space, please welcome Captain Christopher J. Ferguson, United States Navy retired, and crew and commander of STS-135.
Well, good morning, everybody. And thank you very much, General Daly, for that kind introduction. I'd like to welcome the viewing audience on NASA TV, and also I understand we have a special classroom tuning in from Bristol, England, and we have a special class, I believe, from Peru as well. So welcome, everyone. What we'd like to do is talk a little bit about our mission, and but first I'd like to start out with a brief introduction to the crew. To my right is the pilot on the mission. Of course, we have a commander, pilot, and mission specialist. The pilot on this flight was Doug Hurley. This was Doug's second flight. He is a active duty colonel in the Marine Corps. He's got plenty of time flying F-18 aircraft before he joined NASA. He comes from upstate New York, and he's been with us for about 10 years at NASA. So, Doug?
Thanks, Chris. Hello, everyone. We're greatly appreciate you having us here for a little talk. To my right is our mission specialist one, Sandy Magnus. She was responsible for the logistical load that we took up the space station, the MPLM. Big job. It was almost 10,000 pounds of supplies, food, spare parts, and then she was responsible for getting it reloaded to bring back discarded parts and some trash back from the space station. She's a veteran of 3 space flights, including 4.5 months on the International Space Station. She's got a PhD from Georgia Tech, and she's from Belleville, Illinois. Sandy?
Thank you, Doug. We are always happy to talk about space, and hopefully we'll have some fun here today and give you some insights of what's going on the space station and the frantic pace of our mission. To my right is Mission Specialist 2, Rex Walheim. He's a retired Air Force colonel. Rex's job on the mission was, first of all, he was the flight engineer, so he kept track of the systems with Fergie and Doug during the dynamic phases of flight during ascent and reentry. And on orbit, Rex was our spacewalk expert. We did not have a spacewalk during the mission that we performed, but the station crew, Mike Fossum and Ron Guerin, performed while we were there, and Rex was in charge of making sure that that got planned appropriately and then executed appropriately. And in the meantime, he also turned into science guy and did a lot of the science that we had on the middeck, just payloads that went up and down on the space shuttle.
Well, thanks, Sandy, and it is a pleasure to be here. And before I turn it back over to Chris Ferguson, our commander, I want to just say a little bit more what he did on our flight. Obviously, he's the commander, so he's in charge and watching over everything we did. But with a small crew of 4, you can't just have one guy looking back and being the overseer. Like sometimes on shuttle missions, that's one of their main jobs. But he had to pitch in and help in the trenches with us. So besides flying the vehicle on launch and landing and doing the rendezvous and docking, he got to help out in robotics and transfer and all sorts of stuff. So he kept us all on the same page.
Thanks, Rex. Before we continue with our presentation, I'd just like to say how nice it is to be here in this fantastic museum here at the Air and Space Museum. I think that I speak for the entire crew when I say that our love, as we were youngsters, as some of you are right now, for things like science, space, aviation, rocketry was all cultivated in wonderful facilities like this. And if some of you youngsters out there are perhaps interested in what you see today and what you see around you in this wonderful facility, you know, there's plenty of opportunities with NASA or perhaps your own home space agencies. And we're always looking for fantastic astronauts who want to enjoy these experiences or perhaps work as one of the mission controllers or work to design one of these fantastic vehicles that fly into space. So with that, why don't we go ahead and go to our first slide, and we'll begin to talk a little bit about our mission for you. We launched on July 8th of this year.
What does it take to just send something in orbit without having any aerodynamics to worry about? You know, we did that throughout the 60s. To send something to orbit and bring it back as an airplane, that's a whole other synthesis of aero and space. And we're reminded how beautiful a word that is, aerospace. 2 fragments that were never brought together before they needed to. And the shuttle is the living example of what it is when aeronautics meets space exploration.
September 1976, more than 4.5 years after President Nixon signed off on its development, America's new spacecraft, Constitution, gets its first close-up before the cameras. The orbiter itself is well received by the public, but impassioned fans of a particular long-canceled television series called Star Trek wanted it called something else. They staged a successful write-in campaign, and the orbiter was renamed for the Starship featured on the show. Thus, NASA's new shuttle would be the Enterprise, boldly going as no spacecraft had ever gone before. Whatever its name, this bird still needed to prove it could fly. August 12, 1977. On a crystal clear California morning, high above the Mojave Desert, 2 NASA test pilots ready for Enterprise's first flight. The plan was for Fred Hayes, Jr. and Gordon Fullerton to lift the orbiter off a modified 747, then land on a dry lake bed 15,000 feet below. Was undergoing preparations for the program's maiden voyage.
STS-1, an unflown vehicle, and those 2 men getting on board and flying that, trusting that the engineering was correct, trusting that the design was correct, trusting that all the safety measures were in place. To me, it's just amazing.
And you just looked at it on the pad and you said, this looks like no other rocket that I've ever seen before. It's got huge boosters, a tank in the middle, and it's got the equivalent of an airliner hanging off the side. And even though today, by today's standards, it's a very common sight, we're used to seeing it, by the early 80s standards, it was completely revolutionary. And to know that it really wasn't going to fly a test flight. It had flown some gliding landings, but it hadn't flown a real test flight. And the first time it was going to fly, it was going to have two people on board. It was John Young, Bob Crippen. That was a major milestone.
I remember all the talk about the shuttle in the early days, and there was such an excitement in the air because up until then, what were we doing? A capsule would go up and would plunk down in the ocean. You had to go fish it out. And now we were making a space plane. And how awesome is that? You know, it's a rocket when you need it to be a rocket, and then it's an airplane when you need it and want it to be an airplane. And so, what a promise for the future of the space program that represented.
Next slide.
We go to the next slide. As I said, we launched on July 8th of this year. Here you can see the crew at what we call rollout. Rollout is when we take the assembled space shuttle from the vehicle assembly building and we take it out to the launch pad. Normally occurs about a month before launch. And this was a grand affair. You can see that they had the large xenon lights that were focused on the space shuttle as it rolled out. It was really quite an amazing experience. It was the first time I had ever attended, and I was disappointed I hadn't gone to a few others. Because it really is. It reminds you of just what an incredibly gorgeous vehicle this is. It looks. I mean, you can see it. It looks like an airplane strapped to the side of a rocket, and it flew like that for 30 years, and it served us so very well. You also notice there's only 4 crew members on this flight, and that's very unusual. Typically, we fly with anywhere from 6 to 7 crew members. The reason we had 4 crew members on this flight was because it was originally manifested as a rescue mission. We were going to serve just in case the STS-134 crew was stranded aboard the International Space Station. And we have done this ever since we launched Columbia back in 2003. We've provided for a rescue mission to go get a space shuttle crew that perhaps got stranded. Now, of course, we've never used them, but it's always best to be prepared. Well, so we selected a crew of 4 for just that reason, because that's all we needed. And then as evolution came about, we found out we were going to put a payload in this flight just in case we launched. We could resupply the International Space Station with the provisions that they would need to last them about a year. And then as time drew to, as launch got closer, we realized that we could actually fly this mission. And the way we were going to rescue the crew members, because of course there were no space shuttles to come after this, was on Soyuz vehicles. We were going to use a Russian rocket system to bring these crew members back, us, just in case for some reason we got stranded. Now, of course, that didn't come to play, but that's why we had a small crew. It made us very busy on the flight, but one thing we had going for us is we were all experienced. We had all done it before, so there was nobody who was going to experience space for the first time, and we knew we'd be able to get to work right away. Next slide. It was enormously proud to be part of this flight. As show of hands, was anybody at the launch of STS-135? Wow, there's a lot of folks who were there. Well, we included this slide just to show you that you were part of a much larger group of people who came out, and it was encouraging for us. I think it was a true testament to how much the space shuttle had meant to the American public. We had a lot of folks who were associated with the program for over 30 years. We had a lot of people who had never seen a space shuttle launch, and they knew that this was their last opportunity. For those of you who may recognize this is the Titusville Bridge, and they close it during launches, and it was just packed with people. And we have tens of images just like this of crowds of folks who had come to occupy every little viewing spot anywhere around Merritt Island to watch the final space shuttle flight. Next. Launched on July 8th. The mission was scheduled to be just slightly less than 12 days. We ended up getting a 1-day extension. That took our landing time, just that 1-day delay took our landing time from a dawn landing, from a daylit landing to a night landing at about 5:30 a.m. It ended up being just short of a 13-day mission. One thing unique about Atlantis is it does not have a power system that we can plug into the space station like the other 2 space shuttles, Discovery and Endeavour, had. Discovery and Endeavour could fly 16-day missions, basically using power from the International Space Station. Atlantis didn't have that, so that's why we kept it to a smaller, shorter mission. We have a wonderful video that shows the launch sequence. We can go ahead and run that now, and then we'll come back and hear from Doug.
When a generation accomplishes a great thing, it's got a right to stand back and for just a moment